This video was copyright struck a few months back and was taken down, so I'm re-uploading it with a few minor aesthetic changes. I hope you guys like it.
Racism. You know, the problem that Crash failed to solve.
Crash, the movie that failed to solve racism.
And specifically, we're going to discuss school segregation, which it turns out is still a big problem.
Racial segregation is on the rise. The number of schools where 1% or less of the student population is white has more than doubled in the last 20 years.
That's true.
Beginning a sentence like that, with "that's true," makes me feel like there's a lot of other things on your show that aren't. Actually, it makes me feel like it wasn't true, and you're just trying to convince me that it is.
Even as our society has grown more diverse, nearly 7,000 schools have the same racial makeup as the audience of your average Tyler Perry movie.
Oh, I agree. Tyler Perry movies are really racist towards white people and black people.
And look, it would still be problematic, even if these schools were roughly equivalent academically, as that would still be a violation of the principle of Brown versus Board of Education that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. But in practice, they are very rarely equal in any way. Black and Latino children are more likely to attend schools with inexperienced teachers, which are then less likely to offer a college prep curriculum.
That's not a racism issue. That's a teachers' union issue. Maybe we should take it up with them.
On top of which, because race and class are inextricably linked, those students are 6 times as likely to be in high-poverty schools. And while there are teachers and students working incredibly hard in those places, they are often doing so with fewer resources, as one student learned during a school exchange program.
I am so glad that he just brought up class.
Okay, I get what that program was trying to do, but it still seems cruel, giving students a glimpse of what other kids are getting. At least on a plane, they cover first class with a curtain. And sure, they might still bake cookies and waft the smell down the aisle, but that's just to f*** with you.
See, you say that you get what they're trying to do, but at the same time, the analogy that you use in your joke completely disregards that statement.
So how is it possible that our nation's schools are by some measures more segregated now than they have been in over 4 decades?
Because it's class segregation, not race segregation, you race-baiting cuck.
You don't have to go to Mississippi to find a segregated school system. We have it right here in New York City. It shows that the problems that the white liberals have been pointing the finger at the southern segregationists and condemning them for exist right here in New York City.
Hey look, it's Malcolm X calling New York liberals hypocrites. What a surprise! Who would have thought that New Yorkers were hypocrites all along?
Yeah, of course racism exists in New York. Have you never seen West Side Story? It is a musical about love transcending the obstacle of one person being Puerto Rican. It'll never work!
That's the second time this episode he's used fictional racism as proof for real racism. Anyone else find it weird that he's got to refer to Hollywood to find racism?
A handful of white students are transferred to an all-black school. You know there's going to be trouble.
Vanilla ice cream. And I'm gonna take me a big lick.
Okay, that's a third reference to fictional Hollywood racism.
Okay, that is clearly horrible. But on a side note, using the terms chocolate and vanilla is actually the best possible argument for bringing races closer together. Because what happens when you combine chocolate and vanilla? I'll tell you what happens. Fucking Fudgy the Whale happens. And it is superb.
Wait. Is he defending implications of rape?
Exactly. Funding tends to follow white people around the way white people follow the band Fish around. It's a different show every time, man. Last time I was rolling because I snorted Molly off a communal didgeridoo. Different show every time, man.
This is by far the worst joke I have ever seen written for this show. But as an actual response to the funding situation, I'm going to repeat the same words once again. It's a class issue. Class, not race.
Okay, sure, but she was already in a top 10 school. And I do get making sure that your kid has a good education is one of the most important jobs a parent can do. It's right up there with lying about not having a favourite child. Because every parent has a favourite child, and it's Dylan. It's not you, it's not any of your siblings, it's Dylan. Just ask your parents. They like Dylan.
Dylan, Dylan, it's Dylan. Forget about it being unconstitutional. Forget about it being discriminatory. Forget about it actually infringing on people's rights. Let's laugh because it's Dylan.
He does his own laundry. But that man's selfishness had a huge impact. A federal judge ruled in his favour, vacating the district's desegregation plan and basically blowing up the whole thing. And tragically, Charlotte then experienced swift resegregation.
Yup, that man's selfishness. Such selfishness. Fighting for his constitutional right to not be discriminated against. How fucking dare he?
As by 2010, those 1% and 3% figures for Latinos and blacks had grown to 44% and 47%. And I know it is tempting to be angry at that one parent, especially because, and this is true, before the verdict even came down, he moved his family to California, which is the constitutional challenge equivalent of farting in a crowded elevator just as you're stepping off of it.
And now we know where John Oliver stands on the entire issue of constitutional rights. He thinks they're bullshit. He thinks they're the equivalent of a fart. He doesn't care about that piece of paper that gives you your right to free speech or your right to live as a free individual, because that might be infringing on somebody else's right to walk all over you.
But to be fair, this wasn't an isolated incident. All over the country, desegregation plans were struck down, thanks in part to Supreme Court rulings making it easier to challenge them. And the prevailing narrative became that desegregation imposed too high a cost on students for a benefit that was no longer necessary.
No, I'm pretty sure we just established that it was unconstitutional and infringed on people's rights. But I guess that's not the narrative that you're propagating.
It's an attitude that's best summed up by this Louisiana state senator.
Do you think that you have to bus children all over, or bus them long distance, so you can say you sit in a seat next to someone diverse, different from yourself? The Justice Department, they achieved their goal. Who can say we're not desegregated? We have an African-American president. We have an African-American mayor here in Baton Rouge with a majority white in the parish. We've been through all that.
And there it is. The idea that because President Obama was elected, systemic racism was pretty much solved.
And there we have it once again. Another liberal conflating the term racism with the theory of systemic racism. Racism and systemic racism are two very different things. But they have to keep pushing the narrative agenda that they're one and the same, because otherwise, everything they have to say falls apart.
Those parents are all extreme examples, but even if for a moment you give everyone the benefit of the doubt and you assume that all complaints about bus schedules or class sizes are actually just about buses or class sizes, the hard truth is you don't have to be intentionally racist to do things that have racist effects.
You don't have to be intentionally racist to what? What? The fuck did he just say?
In the 60s, if you had insisted on separate lunch counters, not because you hated black people, but just because you loved your son so much you wanted him to get his lunch quicker, the end result would have been exactly the same.
Guys, I'm really hoping that my audience is smart enough to see the implications here. The framing that here's this not racist action that you want to take and having racist implications, but framing it with a racist implication and a racist outcome is not honest at all. Not at all. Not in the slightest. How do people sit here and listen to them? I just don't understand.
And while I get the impulse to seize every tiny advantage you can for your kid, I get that. Segregated schools cause devastating harm to actual children, and not just to their education, but to their very sense of self-worth.
We don't have support at all. We have lack of books, resources, anything you can think of, but when we go in contact with these white children, or should I say Caucasian, they don't know how to act because they believe that they're better than us. And we don't know how to act because we believe that they're better than us.
I'm just going to once again point to the fact that this is a class issue, not a race issue. I will also point the finger at unions once again. In the future, I will do a video or two explaining how the unions are actually destroying the education system. Look forward to that.
Exactly. And that is why it is important to expose kids to other races at a young age. You don't want your child playing Guess Who at a birthday party and asking, is this person bad, to rule out anyone who isn't white. And while, yes, you can absolutely teach kids about racism in the abstract, if your school is overwhelmingly white, important nuances can get lost, as this second grader found after making a bold choice for a school project.
I have a dream today. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation.
Sean is portraying a historical figure assigned by his teacher.
Well, Martin Luther King Jr.
He said, Mom, I want to wear a suit because that's what he wore, and a black tie, and I have to wear a white shirt. And he said, also, I want to do my face in black.
They thought it was inappropriate and it would be disrespectful to black people. But I say that it's not. I like black people.
Okay. First, wow. Second, it is obviously not that kid's fault. He didn't know any better. And
Shame on that kid for not knowing any better and thinking Martin Luther King is a good role model. Shame on him.
finally, if Martin Luther King Jr. could see that clip, I legitimately don't know whether he'd be thrilled or horrified.
I'm willing to bet money that Martin Luther King would have been ecstatic about that kid's enthusiasm towards him. But you know what Martin Luther King would have been horrified at? The way you and your liberal counterparts are treating that child. You are the problem now.
And everyone should be invested in those sorts of solutions because while this always gets framed as an issue about parents and their children, it's actually about adults and everybody. Because kids grow up, and those little doctors, soldiers, police officers and superheroes asking you for candy tomorrow night, well, in a decade or so, they might be actual doctors, soldiers, police officers and assistant directors of human resources. And there are massive and multiple benefits for all of us if they interacted a lot more from an early age. And I know this seems like a lot to ask, but in the words of a small white child dressed as a dead civil rights leader, I have a dream.
Now, I want to conclude this on a very, very simple note. In 2014, 76.3% of Ontario students graduated high school, but New York had 77.8% of its students graduate high school. Ontario goes out of its way to ensure that there are no segregated schools. In fact, there are laws put in place to ensure that there is government housing in every neighborhood. So, the issue must be something else completely. If Ontario has no segregated schools and has a lower graduation rate than New York State. So, I'm just left to insist that it's a class issue and a school board issue, not a segregation issue. Thank you, and have a good night.